Hey everybody, it's D from D&D Ditches, and today the D stands for downtime. I've been really busy this month working on a lot of up-and-coming content for my channel, and I barely had any time to open any of these, so I'm treating this as my downtime activity in between adventures. Let's open up some of these boxes and see what's inside. Okay, so this is the second edition release of the Forgotten Realms campaign setting box set. In some of my older unboxing videos, I looked at prior editions of the Forgotten Realms campaign setting. The very first Forgotten Realms campaign setting was released in 1987 for first edition, and then 2 years later in 1989, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons second edition was released. And then 1 year after that, in 1990, TSR released a standalone book called The Forgotten Realms Adventures, which updated the Realms timeline and updated it to the second edition rules. However, it wasn't until 1993, 4 years after the release of second edition, for Forgotten Realms to receive an updated campaign setting box set. This box is part of the first print run released in 1993, also called the Gold Box, as this box would then go on to get revised in 1994 and 1996, where they changed the cover artwork, and I'll put the revised cover artwork on screen for you. The revised artwork is what the second and the third printing of the set looks like. There are minor differences between the second and the third printing, even though it has the same cover artwork. Mostly has to do with a different logo that's being used. And there are some minor differences between the interior covers, but overall the version of this box set with the revised artwork would generally be referred to as the second printing. Some people don't even differentiate between the second and the third printing because it has the same artwork. Even though the cover artwork is different, there are no material changes with the interior content. So let's open the box and have a look. The seller wrapped up the interior content to protect that. This box set comes with a lot of material on the inside. TSR really goes overboard with the Forgotten Realms box set, as Forgotten Realms was the most popular setting back in second edition, and probably still is these days. The last book in this bundle does not belong with this box set. It is the 1993 TSR Master Catalogue Collector's Edition. It's a bonus book which came with the sale of this box set, and it's a part of the reason why I purchased this listing specifically, because I wanted to see what was inside this. I've never seen this book before. We're going to take a look at this afterwards. Going back to the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, there should be 3 books. Now, this first item, I can tell you, does not belong in this box set. It is a piece of cardstock containing the artwork of different types of monsters, and I would imagine you can pull these out and put on a standee and use them kind of like miniatures. It looks a bit like Dragon Mountain, as I recall Dragon Mountain had something like this. However, this is dated 1992 and Dragon Mountain came out in 1993, so I believe this card belongs to a different product that was released in 1992. If you know which product this card belongs to, let me know down in the comments. There is a TSR catalogue for 1993. Now, it's generally not uncommon to see these catalogues and other flyers and brochures in these box sets. It is not part of the official content of the box set, but it's nice to flip through these catalogues to see what upcoming products that TSR had at the time. There are a few pieces of paper. Again, these things are generally not uncommon to see. We have a plastic overlay which came with a lot of the early Forgotten Realms products. This is used with the poster maps for hex crawl purposes. We have 8 sheets of new monsters, and during this time the Monstrous manual for 2E was released in ring binders. The idea would be for you to add these to the existing binders that you own. We have several pieces of cards which shows the artwork of the holy symbols of the gods as well as heraldry. And there should also be 4 poster maps with a poster of the cover artwork. And we have an extra piece of goodie which does not belong in this box set. Let's just have a quick squiz. I believe this is a map which came with one of the basic D&D adventure modules. I just forgot which one it was, but in any case, this one does not relate to the module that we're looking at. As I mentioned previously, the interior content does not change between the different printings of this box set, except for one thing, which is this poster, so let me open it and show you. And here it is, Forgotten Realms, and this is the artwork. Now I misspoke, it is not the cover artwork of this box. This is actually the cover artwork of the book Forgotten Realms Adventures. This poster is exclusive to this product only. It is only found in the gold box, the first printing of the second edition Forgotten Realms campaign setting box set. Later printings with a revised artwork does not contain this poster. And this poster is the reason why I think that this version of the box set is the superior version. If you're looking to purchase the original second edition Forgotten Realms campaign setting, see if you can get the gold box version because of this poster. Next, let's have a look at the cards with the artwork on them. This first one depicts the different heraldic emblems, I believe, of cities. If you turn over to the back, it tells you what they are. And this one will be Shadowdale, Sembia, Cult of the Dragon. So some of these are the coat of arms of the cities, and some of these are for organizations. This one depicts elder runes. So for example, this is fire, this is Fey, this is death. The Forgotten Realms setting really goes into a lot of detail about how magic works in this setting, as there's a lot of different types of high-level magic, so this setting has a lot of lore with its magic systems. This next one's similar. These are Harper's Marks, and we have Elven runes, and the Underdark symbols. And while we're on symbols, let's have a look at this one. I recognize some of these symbols. That is Elminster's rune. So it is said that high-level wizards in the realms have their own unique rune, which is kind of like a combination of their trademark and their calling card. There's also Calvin Blackstaff and Volo, and we have a few more Underdark symbols here at the bottom. Now these two pages are the holy symbols of the gods. For example, we've got Mystara, Saluna, Shah, Joaquin, Sune, Umberly, Helm. Once you've played a few Forgotten Realms video games, you'll recognize some of these. Let's take a look at the monster stats next. We have the Gambardo, Gibberling Maltha, Bonebat, Aberlin, Deepspawn, Baneguard, and the Nishru. Now I want to talk about the Nishru a little bit. Anybody who has played Baldur's Gate 2 should recognize this because they are a pain in the ass. They're a non-corporeal gaseous outer planar creature. They absorb magic, so any damage dealing spells will actually heal this creature instead of damaging them. They're attracted to magic because they feed on magic. This is how they derive their sustenance. As it feeds on magic, any magic items it makes contact with will lose charges. And while it cannot destroy a magic item, the magic item will lose its magic effect for a limited time. And even worse, any spellcasters that it makes contact with will start losing their memorized spells. There's also a more powerful version of this monster called the Hakesha or something like that. And these two monsters are not in 5th edition, and I wish that they were. And I love these monsters because generally the spellcasters are the most powerful. And these players get to a point where they get really cocky and overconfident because they think they're invincible. Throw one of these monsters at them and you'll put the fear of God back into them. There's also the Quaggoth and Loch Lurker, Dark Naga, and the Gibberling. If you play Baldur's Gate 1, you meet a lot of Gibberling monsters, as well as a Helmed Horror, which was also in Baldur's Gate 1. When I first played Baldur's Gate 1 back in the day, and I met one of these monsters, and I thought it was an undead. So I tried to turn undead on them, and it wouldn't work. Helmed Horrors are not undead. And then there is the Scum, and then the Tressum. If you play Baldur's Gate 3, you might recognize this creature. Gale has a pet Tressum called Tara. I'll admit, when I played Baldur's Gate 3 and when Gale started talking about the Tressum, I didn't actually know what it was. I thought he was joking, and then when I met Tara, I was like, oh, this is an actual creature. So I played through Baldur's Gate 3 without knowing what a Tressum was. Now I realize Tressum was part of Forgotten Realms all the way back in 2nd edition. Also, I like their design a lot. It looks like a house cat with colorful wings on them. And then the Draco Lich, which is a Lich Dragon, which I do recognize, as it was included as part of the 2E Monstrous manual released in '95. Let's open up the maps and have a look. This is the first one. I previously showed off the 1st edition version of the Forgotten Realms box set. The maps in that were vertical, whereas the 2nd edition maps are horizontal. Plus it also has a much nicer color scheme. This first one shows off the Sword Coast. We have Baldur's Gate there, and it goes down to Candlekeep and Beregost. That's as south as this map goes. And it goes northward up to Daggerford. And then we have the High Moor, the Serpent Hills, Marsh of Shalimba. This is where the Enarok Desert begins. There's Evereska settled by the elves. And on this corner, we have Battle of the Bones, the Sunset Mountains, and it goes all the way down to Eriabor and Easting. The next map shows the land that's to the east of the previous map, as here we have the Enarok Desert, which connects to the previous map. And south of that, we have Cormyr. And then as we move eastward, we have Sambia, and then north of that we have Cormanthor, which are the Elven Forest. And this part of the realms is called the Dale Lands, as most of the towns in this region have the Dale suffix like Mistledale, Shadowdale, Daggerdale, and so on. If we go further eastward, this also shows us the region of the Moon Sea as well as the Sea of the Fallen Stars, which is down to the south in this region. This is also known as the Inner Sea. I have been reading the first edition box set. The next map is vertical. This is also zoomed out, whereas the previous set of maps have more details, whereas this one shows you more regions of the realms but don't give you as much detail. To the very north we have Icewind Dale, there's Luskan, Neverwinter, Waterdeep is here. We also have the Moonshade Isles, Baldur's Gate, Elturel, Candlekeep. And then we go south towards Arm, Tethir, and Kalimshan. And at the very south, we see a little bit of Chult, and then there's Lantern. And this last map shows us the land towards the east of the previous map. There is Vasa and Damara, also known as the Bloodstone Lands, Thay and Rashiman. And as we move southward, this is also the region that's called the South. Before I move on, I'll just show you this overlay. You just put this on top of the map and then you can use it to do hex crawls between the locations. Now let's dive into the books. This first one is called A Grand Tour of the Realms. This book is 128 pages. It starts off talking about the different races in the realms, and the different sub-races, like this page will give you the different types of elves that exist on Faerun. And then it goes into the different classes and their purpose and their role in this setting. And then this book spends most of its page count expanding on the different regions of Faerun. And the book is literally structured like a grand tour of the realms. Here is the route that it takes. It starts in the Dale Lands and goes through Cormyr, Sambia, Moonsea, the Vast, goes into the Dragon Coast, Western Heartlands, Waterdeep, the Islands, the Savage North, Anarok, the Cold Lands, the Unapproachable East, the Old Empires, Villon Reach, Empires of the Sands, and the Shining South. The presentation of this book is 1,000,000 times better than the first edition version. I'm reading through first edition right now. What first edition did was that it listed all the different regions and towns and cities and places and sites in alphabetical order with no rhyme and reason. And it made it really difficult to learn about the different regions because you're jumping all over the place and you're not getting a sense of what each region is like. And I love how they've improved this. So you're starting with the Dales, you're learning about the different towns and cities and sites and dungeons, and you get a feel about this region and then you move on to the next one. The other thing that I really like about this organization is that by 1993, there's already been a lot of supplements that's been released for Forgotten Realms in both first and second edition, and the names for these regions are consistent with the supplement that's been released, like the Empire of the Sands, Shining South, Old Empires, Unapproachable East. For somebody who gets introduced to the realm through this map, if someone likes a region, they can go and find that supplement that's going to give them even more information on that book. Like if you read through this and you're like, oh, I really like the sound of Mohorand because it has an Egyptian theme, then you can go and find the book called The Old Empires that's going to give you an expanded lore about that region. The book then explains the Faerunian calendar and the 10-day system, the languages, and then we start in the Dale Lands. Most of this consists of farming or agricultural towns. There's also Shadowdale, which we're going to get a lot more information in a bit. The Elven Woods and the ruins of Mithranor is also in this region. Then we move on to Cormyr. The Cormyr region kind of has an Arthurian knights kind of flavor, like a righteous king with their chivalrous knights, that kind of thing. And then we move into its neighbor, which is Sambia. The Sambia region is very wealthy because they're ruled by merchants. Now, what's also interesting is that back in first and second edition, this setting really pushes these three regions as your starting region to adventure in. And apparently Ed Greenwood, the creator of the Forgotten Realms, for his home game, he had a game that's set in Waterdeep, and he had another game that was set in the Dale Lands and Cormyr. And a lot of the NPCs and dungeons and places that's developed in this region were from his own game. So these three regions are really developed in the early days of the realms. This is our first and second edition, as it's really built for you to start your game in these regions. Then we move on to the Moonsea. and then the Vast. So the city of Raven's Bluff is in this region, and Raven's Bluff is also what's called the Living City. So in the 90s there was the RPGA, which is I think Role-Playing Games Association, and they essentially ran the games at cons and other events. They would be considered the equivalent of the Adventure League these days. And Raven's Bluff, the Living City, would continually get new sources and new material written for it. There was a series of 4 or 5 supplements that was purely on developing Raven's Bluff, and a lot of that was developed through the games that were run by the RPGA. Then we have the Dragon Coast. Westgate was another city that was well developed. And then we move on to the Western Heartlands, which these days we would just call the Sword Coast. So in this day and age, a lot of the 5th edition adventures would be set around this area. We have Baldur's Gate and Elturel. There is Candlekeep. This is the region that would later be made famous with the Baldur's Gate video games. And then it moves into the largest city in the realms, Waterdeep. There's not that much coverage for Waterdeep in this book, there's only 4 pages, and the reason for that is Waterdeep has received multiple other supplements covering that city, and will receive its own box set called City of Splendors, which we're going to cover next month, so make sure you subscribe. We have the different islands, and then we move into the Savage Coast, including Icewind Dale, which only has 2 paragraphs. And even though Neverwinter has become a big name these days, back in 2nd edition, there wasn't a lot written for it. The rest of the regions are not given a lot of details. So if you want more information about these places, you will have to go and find that supplement. Some of these regions will also receive a box set of their own, like the Unapproachable East got a box set called Spellbound. The Old Empire's got its own source book, as did Velon Reach. Empires of the Sands will also get a box set called Lands of Intrigue, which covers Armk and Tethyr. And then we finish off with the Shining South, and that is the Grand Tour of the Realms. The next book is called Running the Realms, which is 64 pages. This is the book that covers the organizations, NPCs, and also their gods. It starts with what type of campaigns that you can run, tells you how to use the maps and the grids, the movement rates, and then it goes into wild magic, which was introduced in Tome of Magic, the events that's happened so far, and the current year as of the printing of this box set is 1367DR, and it has progressed 10 years since the 1st edition box set, which is 1357DR. And this section gives you an event of the news items and the events that's due to take place within the year. And then it goes into the groups like the Harpers, the Lord's Alliance, Iron Throne, the Zhentarim, and then the next section provides you with a list of NPCs. A lot of these are from books. Some of these are influential NPCs in the world, like Azuth IV, the King of Cormyr. We've got Drizzt from the novels. Some of these NPCs are really famous, like Calvin Blackstaff and Manshoon. And then you've got the less famous ones, like most of these that I don't know who they are. And then it goes into the different gods of Forgotten Realms. Back in 2nd edition, gods were called powers. They were also divided into ranks. Greater powers are the most powerful, then you've got intermediate powers, and then lesser powers. They're supposed to have mechanical differences in gameplay, as lesser powers can only grant up to like 5th level spells or something like that. But I don't know if every 2nd edition table will actually use those rules. Then we also have some dead powers. These are the gods that died during the Avatar trilogy, also known as the Time of Troubles. So Walking was assumed dead at this point. And then we have some quasi powers. Then we have some non-human powers like the Elven and Dwarven deities. And that is Running the Realms. And the last book is called Shadowdale. This is mainly a source book on the town of Shadowdale. This is also the town that Elminster resides in. We have a list of events relevant to Shadowdale. Morngrim is the king or ruler of Shadowdale. It describes the surrounding lands. We have a map for this region. Back in 2nd edition, a lot of these box sets would have a book that purely describes a particular town. There's a box set called The North, which contained an entire book on the town of Daggerford. We're now going through the different facilities in town. We have a lot of detail on this inn. And then there's also Elminster's Tower, which is written up like it's a dungeon. So you can insert this into your game if you're exploring his tower. There's also the Twisted Tower of Ashaba. This book is 96 pages long, so if you combine the page count of all 3 books, this is the largest product that I've ever seen for 2nd edition. Some of the other settings would love to have this many pages devoted to them. So the second half of this book is an adventure called Beneath the Twisted Tower. This adventure is for a party between 1st and 3rd level and is set entirely within Shadowdale, specifically the tunnels beneath the Tower of Ashaba. At the start, the adventurers arrive at Shadowdale in front of the inn, so it encourages to go into the inn and talk to some NPCs. One of the NPCs in town will provide you with more information and give you this quest. You can either continue the adventure by accepting the quest this guy gives you, or you can just choose to go and explore the tower anyway. You also notice this adventure takes advantage of some of the new monsters. We've got the Gambado and also the Quaggoth. Back in the old days, the style of adventure is a little bit different compared to these days. A lot of the times, if an NPC gives you a rumor, that is your cue as a player to take your initiative and go and explore that site. So a lot of the times, these adventures wouldn't even have an official quest giver that says, I need you to go and do this, as most players would just do it without really being asked. So within the caverns, you'll also meet the Drow, and we have the end of the adventure. Now the final 2 pages of this book provide you with all of the Forgotten Realms product that's been released until this point, which includes the sub-settings like Karator, Zakhara, and Maztica, as well as a list of all the novels written for the realms. This is really useful, as if you're looking for any particular Forgotten Realms product, this will give you the title. Like if you're looking for more information on the Shining South, well, there is a supplement for you. And that's Shadowdale. Now let's check out this curious book, 1993 TSR Master Catalogue Collector's Edition. You see on the back that this book had a recommended retail price of $9.95 US. And what this seems like is a catalogue that is disguised as a coffee table book, which they charged money for. I don't know if that idea is going to fly these days. Seems to be a bit of a curiosity. We have some nice color artwork printed on high quality glossy paper. Seems like each writer at TSR contributes towards an article. We just had Steve Winner, and now we have Ed Greenwood, as he introduces Forgotten Realms, and then we also have the introduction to Dragonlance, and then Al Qadim by Andrea Hayday, Dark Sun by Timothy B. Brown, and Ravenloft by William W. Connors, Greyhawk, Spelljammer. This seems to be an introduction and celebration of the different campaign settings. Buck Rogers also gets a section. Poor Jeff Grubb probably drew the short straw having to write the Buck Rogers article. The Buck Rogers IP was owned by Lorraine Williams during this time, and Lorraine was the CEO of TSR at this point. And TSR published several Buck Rogers products at the time. There's also Gamma World. The next section is where the catalogue starts. The pages with this grey trim are for basic Dungeons & Dragons products. And there we have the product listing with the prices. Here we have the Hollow World box set retails for $18 at the time. That was a popular Beckme product. And then we move on to the advanced products. We have Dragon Mountain, Book of Artifacts. The products being featured on these pages with the artwork are the up-and-coming products in 1993. The other thing that's interesting about these pages is that they're all using placeholder artwork. When these products were released, they had a similar but different cover. So what happened back in the day at TSR was that when they had designed for a product to be launched, they had in-house artists that would draw up their version of the cover. And this beta placeholder artwork would be printed on catalogs that would be shipped out to retailers and suppliers. But in the meantime, they would outsource that cover artwork to another artist who would then do their rendition of the cover. So the final product of Dragon Mountain looks different. I'll put the final artwork on the screen for you. The same with Book of Artifacts, as well as the products that are on this page. So I think this book is really interesting because we get a larger print of the original beta artwork. On the next page, we had the grey, green, and the burgundy books. The final artwork for Magic Encyclopedia was the same. These ones look like they're beta. Monstrous Manual, that's a beta artwork. Player's Guides, we have the list of all the 2E products. Women of Fantasy Calendar, this one looks badass as hell. And Forgotten Realms campaign setting, which we just looked at. Now the book moves on to a purple trim, and this denotes all of the Forgotten Realms products. We also have novels here as well. Both of these are placeholder artwork, but you see that some of these placeholder artwork are actually quite nice. This one in particular, but whereas you see this one is a bit rough. Both Chult and Dalelands have their placeholder cover. The girl on the Dalelands cover looks like the Wendy's girl. And what's interesting here is that the final cover for Dalelands is pretty much a recreation of this exact image. Whereas the composition for the Chult book ended up being quite different. This dinosaur ended up taking the center stage. And then the next section is Dragonlance, which I don't have any experience with actually. Most of these products are novels. The beta cover not only has placeholder artwork, they also spelled Wolfgang Bell's name wrong. Secrets of the Lamp is pretty close to the final. Dragon Crown's final artwork also remained the same, they just changed the border to yellow. Ivory Triangle's final artwork changed a lot, the box became green, but you see the placeholder artwork is extremely simplistic. I think you can tell from this page which one of these had the final artwork. Now this is really interesting. Both City State of Tyr and Earth, Air, Fire and Water, their final covers look nothing like this. There's the Dark Suns product list, and we move on to Ravenloft. The placeholder artwork for Castle Forlorn looks sinister as hell. I mean, look at that, an arrow through the neck. The final artwork also looked nothing like this. They ended up going with something that looked like the Loch Ness Monster. Web of Illusion placeholder looks funny because he looks like a dog. In the final artwork, it was a Rakshasa. Dark of the Moon had a similar final composition, whereas the creator was completely changed. The final Van Richten guys look different, but I'd say they retained the essence of the original. The Monstrous Companion Beta was also different. Then we move on to Greyhawk. Marklands ended up being the same. Interestingly, Wars and From the Ashes look pretty similar to the final product. And we have Spelljammer. The original Astro Mundi cluster cover looks intimidating as hell. I much prefer this one, it looks a lot more sinister, whereas the final artwork was boring as hell. The original Kryn Space also looks more interesting than the final product. Space Layers looks about the same. I don't know what the Amazing Engine is, and don't care about Buck Rogers. And then we have Gamma World and Family Games. Strategy board games. And non-D&D novels and Dragon and Dungeon magazine. And attached at the back is the 1993 product release schedule poster. Could you imagine first paying for a book that's essentially propaganda and then putting that on your wall? This is probably one of the most interesting products that I've seen that TSR has released. Propaganda disguised as a book that you pay for, and the collector edition at that. And next up we have the Mystara adventure Night of the Vampire. If you didn't know, Mystara is the setting that BACME D&D takes place in. It was also called Known World. Night of the Vampire was released in 1994. And 1994 saw several Mystara products being released in Advanced 2nd Edition. And most of them came in a box set like this, and all the box set adventures came with a compact disc or a CD. And these are adventures designed with multimedia in mind. And the CD usually included music, sound effects, dialogue and lines recorded by voice actors that act like the NPC that you're encountering in the adventure. And they usually came with handouts and other things. And we have a map here. This map shows the floor plan to Vandevixny Manor. And this is the upper floor. We have cellars, gatehouse, and also the main house. This looks like the ground floor. So this adventure obviously takes place inside this manor. And since it's called Night of the Vampire, you're probably encountering a vampire. There are also handout sheets. Now, these are typically clues that your players could find, and they act as props that you can hand out to your players, and they look like scrolls or letters that your players will be able to find inside the manor. Some of the previous Mystara adventures that I looked at also came with pre-generated characters, but in this case, it looks like you're generating your own character. And the aim of these additional trinkets is there to foster engagement in the adventure. So the introduction tells you how to use the CD. So when you get to a part where it says track 5, you're supposed to play track 5 on the CD, and that'll give you either music, sound effects, or prose that describes the scene, or NPC dialogue. This adventure is designed for 4 to 6 players between levels 1 and 3, so it can be an introductory adventure if you wanted to, but at this point they have already released a starter adventure. It's called First Quest, or Introduction to AD&D, and a lot of these Mystara adventures are designed to be continuation for players who play the starter box adventures. The Mystara adventure that I looked at prior to this one was called Mark of Ember, which was a sequel to a classic adventure called Castle Ember, which also took place inside a mansion and had horror undertones. So it seems like these Mystara adventures, they were really trying to go for these horror themes. Who would blame them though? Horror was just as popular popular back in the 90s as it is now. This adventure is only 32 pages, so it's not very long. It'll probably only take you a couple of sessions to get through, but they're going for quality instead of quantity. And the very last page, we have the vampire stat block. And that is the CD, and I'll show you the inside of it. If you played Night of the Vampire, let me know down in the comments what you thought of it. This next one is called the Crusades Campaign Sourcebook. Now, we just saw in the catalogs that they had these green cover books, there were the grey cover books and the burgundy cover books. These covers are made of essentially plastic and they're extremely durable. The burgundy cover books were player handbooks that are targeted at players, and it gives new player options for classes and races. It introduces a lot of kits, spells, skills, that kind of thing. The grey cover books are DM references, and they provide additional resources for DMs to use for world building and other tools. And they also released 7 of these green cover historical reference books. And what these historical reference books are, you can kind of think of them like a mini campaign setting, as they're designed to take a D&D game into our past within specific periods of real-world history. This book specifically looks at playing during the Crusades of the 1100s. All of these historical reference books also come with a map. So it starts by giving you some information about this time period. This sourcebook focuses on the first 3 crusades when the future outlook for Outremer, Christian Palestine, looks brightest. So they were the religious conflicts during this period, and there are more history about the period prior to this time and what led into the Crusades. Chapter 2 starts with an embarrassing typo. That is supposed to say the Saracens, but they typed Scaracens. Typos in fantasy books are extremely troublesome because you don't actually know whether that's supposed to be like that. But if you flip back to the table of contents, there it says the Saracens. So it's really unfortunate that they had such a massive typo in the most important part of this page. This section provides more information on Islam as it was at the time. It's important to note that they're discussing the events at the time, not what they are today. This book was released in 1994. I think this was the last of the historical books. Also, we need to remember that back in the early 90s, most people did not have access to the internet. And even if you did have access to the internet at the time, the internet wasn't like the way that we have it today, where you can find pretty much anything you want. So most people did not have access to find out about historical events or other cultures or anything like that. And this is why you find a lot of these AD&D books where it says, do your research at your local library. So if you were interested in running a game that was set in a particular time period or with a particular culture, you were at the mercy of whatever that you had available at your local library. And these books are designed to help players who may be interested in playing during a particular time in history, or just use these books as inspiration for their own game. So it is very likely that a lot of the research that were done for these books were not that comprehensive because the accessibility of the information was severely limited back in the day. So I think it's important to note that these books are not written out of bigotry or xenophobia, as I do not think the writers of these books had any ill intent, as they were just trying to educate us gamers on little pieces of history that we might be able to take inspiration from. Now, this chapter gives us the class options that are available during this time period, and you're able to play 3 versions of this of purely historical. So that would be classes that would only be available or reasonably available during that historical period in that location. Legendary means that there are some folklore involved. Fantasy means that this is like a fantasy version of the history. And it's really just looking at whether the flavor of this class fits that time period. And here we also have the class kits that are reasonably available to this setting on this period. Not all of these kits are available in this book. AA denotes Al-Qadim Arabian Adventures. This is from the Al-Qadim setting, which is more of an Arabian setting. CFH is the Complete Fighter's Handbook. That is one of the Burgundy books that I just spoke about. CTH is Complete Thieves Handbook. And then we have Complete Bard's Handbook, Complete Priest Handbook. So anything that's marked CCS are the new kits introduced in this book. This book then goes into currency and equipment as it fits this setting. And then we also have some common names that are used during this period. And then it goes into talking about the different kits and how they fit in. The next chapter is military orders and crusading warfare. This is the lore part that I would imagine mostly pulled from history. We have a map of the region. The next chapter is Outreamers or Outreamers. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that word wrong. If you know how it's supposed to be pronounced, let me know down in the comments. This would be the region that this conflict took place in back in the day. And then we have the timeline from 1098 to 1187, and this outlines all of the important events that happened during this time, just in case you want to be historically accurate. And the next section is magic monsters and the supernatural. This starts off with talking about the priests and clerics and how their magic work, whether your setting is based on historical, legendary, or the fantasy version. Obviously, if you're leaning towards the more fantasy side of the setting, then the magic is going to feel more fantastical. And the same thing for wizards. And then it goes into folklore and monsters that are appropriate during this time. Magic items that fit this flavor. Tales of the Crusades, this look like stories from this period. So I knew of people who owned these green historical reference books, but I didn't know of anybody who actually played in any of these settings. So I'm wondering if most people who bought these books just read them for inspiration. And the last chapter gives you adventure ideas on the type of hooks and the type of adventures that you could do in this setting. And then towards the end, we have a section on glossary on what the words mean. A lot of these are foreign words. And other sources, just in case you want to get some more inspiration. Because remember, we didn't have internet back in the day. So that was the book. Now let's have a look at the map. So this is a larger version of the map that was included in the book of this region, which the Crusades took place in. The names of these places are all what they were named at the time, and it stretches all the way down to Egypt. And that was the Crusades campaign source book. We're going to take a look at 3 packages together. Now we have 3 books here, and they are called the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Monstrous Arcana series. And they're divided into a trilogy of sub-series, and each sub-series starts with a monster ecology book, which goes to expand a classic D&D monster, giving them a lot more background lore, culture, their biology. And each of these monster ecology books is accompanied by a trilogy of adventures. So the first monsters being featured in Monstrous Arcana were the Beholders. The ecology book was called I, Tyrant. It was subsequently followed by a trilogy of adventure modules. Now, I don't own any of that first set, which was released in 1996. 1997 saw the second set of Monstrous Arcana being released, with the Sea Devils being the ecology book, and this time it focuses on the Sahagwin. You can also see from the Monstrous Arcana logo that it features a symbol dictating the monster being featured. And the middle book, Sea of Blood, is the third of the trilogy of adventures, which accompanies the Sea Devils, prominently feature the monster being spotlighted, and in this case, it's the Sahagwin. And then in 1998, the third set of Monstrous Arcana was released, and this time it features the Mind Flayers. Obviously, the Illithiad is a play on the word Illithid, which is the name that the Mind Flayers call themselves, and it also references the Iliad, which was the Odyssey written by Homer. So let's have a flip through. Let's go through the Sea Devils first. So this is a 96-page book. As it says on the back, this book is the second in the series of accessories which focuses on some of the most popular monsters in AD&D, and it names the trilogy of accompanying adventures Eviltide, Night of the Shark, and Sea of Blood, which is the one that we have here. Each of these ecology books also come with a poster. And this poster shows various Sahagwin from the hatchling, which is the baby form. And then we have the warrior, female, priestess, baronial guard, chieftain, senior priestess, baron, high priestess, prince, royal guard, royal high priestess, and the king. I would imagine that these denote the escalating ranks within Sahagwin society, as we have the king of the Sahagwin being the highest ranked. At the bottom of this poster, we also have some Sahagwin weapons. We have the trident. This looks like a spear and arrow with the crossbow. Now notice all of these are piercing weapons. This is due to the fact that in D&D, underwater combat always incurs a penalty for blunt and slashing weapons, whereas most piercing weapons can be used without penalties for the most part. And we also have an illustration of some of the different types of sharks. Let's give this a flip through. We have some really nice artwork in color. This is also printed on some high quality glossy paper. There we have the internal anatomy of the Sahuagin, the different organs and digestive system. Generally, these ecology books all start with something similar. We have some deep sea horrors, and this also talks about lycanthropes, including Sahuagin lycanthropes and weresharks. And then moving on to abilities and limitations. The types of weapons being favored, for example, tridents, which we just saw from the poster, nets, their senses with sight and hearing, and we have some tables when it comes to visibility distance. Now, this is consistent with the 2nd edition player's handbook encounter distance, but obviously modified for Sahuagin and different types of water. There's some really nice artwork in this, and the formatting of these pages look a lot like a coffee table book. Seems like the Sahuagin also have a close relationship with the sharks, being able to control them to a certain extent, which also seems to be the reason why some of these adventures also feature the sharks. And here we have the different ranks of the Sahuagin as we saw on the poster. Generally in the monster manual you might get 2 or maybe 3 different varieties of the Sahuagin. This table gives you about a dozen different ones, so you can use it to really scale your adventures up or down if you need weaker Sahuagin or stronger ones. It gives the DM a lot of variety into different nuance of the same monster. Instead of saying there are 5 Sahuagin coming at you, it could be like 1 high priestess, a baron, a chieftain, and 2 warriors. Then we move into their history and also their mythology. Secular is their deity. And then it goes into psychology and society, how they think, how they're different to humans. Goes into the Sahuagin name, why Sahuagin hate magic, the ranks within the Sahuagin society, and then we have the hierarchy being illustrated in this diagram using different fishes. Really goes into their society with disputes, different practices, rituals, food, commerce, funeral, entertainment, and sacrifices. And then the book gives you a sample Sahuagin village, which is really nicely illustrated. Each of these sites being expanded with further descriptions, encounters, treasures, NPCs. This is an underwater Sahuagin village that's already been pre-built for you, so all you have to do is just insert that into your game if you want to make use of the Sahuagin. And then we have technology and architecture, the different crafts, writing, stonework. Here we have an underwater maze that's connected via tunnels with different traps. And then we have some new spells for the Sahuagin priest. And we have expanded rules for underwater adventures. These rules could also work if you have a game where you're spending a lot of time underwater. Not necessarily got to do with Sahuagins. It could be that you're playing Planescape and you're in the plain water. You could be in a water planet in Spelljammer. Or you could just be exploring the Sea of Swords. Then we have the underwater characteristics for weapons. A lot of these weapons may be nerfed underwater, so if you want to make your game seem a bit more realistic. We have the deep sea horror, the Anguillian. And the final page is the new sharkware monster pronounced Narwignia. And that is the Sea Devils. Now let's move on to the adventure Sea of Blood. As the Sea of Blood is the 3rd adventure in a trilogy, it says it can be played as a standalone adventure, or it can serve as the finale of the Sahuagin adventure trilogy that started with Eviltide. So like most adventures in this era, the cover comes off. And on the inside, we have some maps. There is this Throne of Teeth, the Central Spire, the Unfathomed Deeping. This very last one is the most interesting. It's the Dominion of the Deep Mother. It's literally the innards of a giant sea monster. So this adventure is 64 pages. Now, these accompanied adventures do have something in common. The first 2 adventures in the trilogy are both 32 pages, and the finale is always 64 pages. And the ecology book is always 96 pages. And this has remained consistent throughout the Monstrous Arcana line. This module quickly summarizes the previous adventures. If you're using this module as a standalone, you've got some hooks on how to get the module started. And then the adventure quickly begins. So the first thing that I've noticed is that the pages in the adventure are not as high quality as the one that's in the ecology book. These are just standard paper. I mean, it's still pretty good. And these are also printed in black and white, whereas we've got color pages on the ecology book. There's also not a lot of artwork in the adventure either. So these pages are obviously designed to be used with the map. There we have an underwater arena. So obviously I have not read any of these Monstrous Arcana books. And because they're released fairly late into the 2nd edition era, they're also fairly rare as well. A lot of these books also come with a hefty price tag as well. I would imagine because they're rarer to come by, which is not uncommon for a lot of the books released in 97 and 98. Every now and then I see a trilogy of adventures being bundled together and sold as a set. They're not cheap obviously, but if you want to collect that as a set, it's worth considering buying the books together. Buying them separately like the way that I have means now I have to look for each of the books separately, and they're not easy to find, especially at a decent price. In the last few pages we have some new magic items, such as the Anchor of Travel of the Narwhal Hornblade. And then a couple of more maps in the final pages. We have the Prison Maze, Arena, City of Abiding Hunger, and the cross-section view. And fittingly, an ad for Planescape in the last page, just in case you want more aquatic adventures in the plane of water. And that is the Sea of Blood. Now let's have a look at the last book, the Illithiad. It says on the back the Illithiad is the 3rd volume of the popular Monstrous Arcana game accessory series. I don't know if you would call this series popular, as it felt like it flew under a lot of people's radars. A lot of people don't realize that these books exist. Similar to the Sea Devils, this book also contains artwork in color, and the pages are also printed using high quality glossy paper. We have an image of the Illithiad and its internal organs. And the next page goes into Ceramorphosis. Anybody who has played Baldur's Gate 3 should know what that means. It's essentially the process of transformation from another race into a mind flayer. And it goes into the life cycle when it becomes an adult, and other forms of Illithiad, such as the Ulitharids, the Alhun, and the Elderbrain. And then there are Illithid vampires, Neolithids, and so on. The other thing about Illithids is that they're psionic creatures capable of using psionic abilities. I have done a video review covering the complete Psionics handbook, which goes through the mechanics of 2nd edition psionics. However, it seems like this book uses the revised 2nd edition psionic rules, which I think was introduced in player options, skills and powers. And this is a complete overhaul of the entire psionics system and makes it no longer compatible with the psionic mechanics from the original rules. And you can tell because it mentions M-Thaco, which is mental to hit AC 0, as well as mental armor class. It tries to streamline the psionic mechanics by making it into an attack roll, as opposed to the original archaic rules, which are quite convoluted. This section provides psionic abilities, but reading through it, they don't look like new abilities because I recognize all of them. Seems like this is more of a conversion of the original psionic abilities into the revised versions. This book was written by Bruce Cordell, who joined TSR towards the tail end of the 2nd edition era. And I watched an interview with him probably last year, and he spoke about his career, and he actually talked about this book. He said this book invented a lot of the lore and culture and background or origin of the Mind Flayers, and some of it was even used in Baldur's Gate 3. And if you play Baldur's Gate 3, you know that Mind Flayers feature quite prominently in that game, and there's quite a lot done with them. For example, the inter-Illithid relationships. Now we have the different creeds of the Illithids. Social customs. There's some really awesome pieces of artwork in this book. Non-psionic communication. Illithid names, outcasts. And then a section on the Illithid versus Githyanki and their struggles. Similar to the previous book, now we come to the section where it provides us with a Mind Flayer town or community, village. And the tunnels go underground, and we have some maps of the facilities underground. There's the Outer Ring and the Inner Ring. This looks really cool, really creative, and also loving all of the artwork as well. Actually, this entire book looks really fascinating. It really makes me want to read this book and made me want to get all of the associated adventures because it just seems so interesting. Like, we also have Illithiad technology. Like, I don't think we get to see things like this very much. Like, this is an Illithiad scientist with his tools and gadgets. And then we have steampunk mind flayers. And of course, then it goes into talking about the spellgemmer. Here is the Nautiloid. Then we have the monster stats of the different variations. And not just for mind flayers, but creatures that's typically associated with them, such as Grimlocks and Cranium Rats as well. And then we turn the page, we have some artwork on the different types of Illithiads. I checked the database, but this book did not have the poster map as part of the package when it was shipped to retail. By 1998, TSR was on the verge of bankruptcy, so we were quite lucky that this book even saw print as it is. So it seems like what they've done is they've just included this piece of artwork in the book itself, whereas if it weren't for them struggling financially so badly, this would probably have been included as a poster map, as it's drawn in the similar style as the previous book. So we have the regular Illithiad, the Illithiad, the Urophion, Brain Golem, and the Vampire Illithiad. And then we also have some diagrams of some related creatures, such as I believe that these things are the tadpoles. This looks like a weapon, and we also have the Intellect Devourer. And then the last few pages are for monster stat blocks. We have the Elderbrain, which is featured at Baldur's Gate 3, and then the Urophion and the Neolithids. I always thought this was called the Neolithid, but reading the name closer, it's Neothelid. And the last one, which is Gullbrawn, which unfortunately does not have a piece of artwork, but it is a relative of the fearsome Bullet. And that is the Illithiad. Next up, we have two more Ravenloft modules, so we're going to look at the Evil Eye first. The Evil Eye is an adventure designed for 3 to 6 characters between levels 4 and 6. And this adventure was released in 1995. We have a brief description on the back of this book. Gabriel Adair, who, if you're familiar with Ravenloft, is the Dark Lord of Invidia. The Evil Eye is a series of 6 scenarios involving the Vistani and their most hated nemesis, the legendary Dakar. This adventure also features the Carnival. It also incorporates some of the new lore introduced in Van Richten's Guides to the Vistani and to the Fiends. The cover is detachable, and we also have a poster map included with this module. The inside of the cover has some illustrations on the Virago, the riverboat of Captain Nathan Timothy, and some interior maps of 123 Bog Street. The book is 64 pages and starts with a glossary of some Vistani words, such as Giorgio referring to any non-Vistana, or Giogotto, a non-member of Vistana who is considered a friend or ally. And it also offers a definition on the Dakar, or Dakar, not sure how you're supposed to say this word, meaning an abomination prophesies to bring doom to all Vistani tasks. And the task is further defined as a nation of Vistani, which is made up of several tribes, which are in turn divided into caravans. So essentially, the Dakar is the prophesized enemy to all Vistani. From the little Ravenloft lore that I know, this module is quite relevant to the history of Ravenloft, and it has further implications for future events in the lands of the Mist. The first adventure is called Widower Once Again, and then we move on to the second adventure called River Cruise. This book seems to imply that these adventures can be run individually, but obviously to get the full story you will want to run them consecutively. The third adventure is named Carina, and it also involves the Carnival. The Carnival in Ravenloft is exactly how it sounds. It has a lot of the features that's traditionally associated with the Carnival or the circus, like freak shows, contortionists, acrobats, fortune tellers, that kind of thing, and would get its own book in 1998 called Carnival, where it goes into the background and the story of the Carnival and their purpose. The next adventure is called the Vistani. This one is fairly short, it's only about 6 or so pages. And then it moves on to Dogfight. Most of these adventures are not very long. They're about 8 or 10 pages or so. And then we have Vishnad. And then as the adventure wraps up, it has a section on further adventures in Invidia, where it provides you some hint on the current goings on in the domain of Invidia. and expands on the base setting box. And I think this module is where the Gentleman Caller is introduced to the setting. The Gentleman Caller is a fairly notorious character in Ravenloft, although I think his story was never told in full. It's a bit of a dangling storyline as far as Ravenloft is concerned. Now let's have a look at the map. We have the map for the domain of Nvidia, which borders Barovia, so it's kind of located in the center of the core. And then we have another map, and this is called Carina in the surrounding area. And then there is the map of the Hebme estate, also known as Cliff House. This is the exterior and the surrounding area. And then we have also the map for the interior of Cliff House. And that's the Evil Eye. And then the next one is Ravenloft Children of the Night Werebeasts. This book was published in 1998, so it's a late era Ravenloft product. So at this point, there were 8 Van Rigden's guides that were released, the last one being the Vistani, which came out in 1995. So after the Van Rigden's guides came the Children of the Night series, and there were 4 books in this series. This is the 3rd one. The Children of the Night series provides you NPCs that belong to a certain category of creatures. So obviously with the Werebeasts, we're looking at were creatures like werewolves, were-ravens, and the like. Following the introduction, we get right into it. This is Andre Desang, who is a were-rat. It provides you the background of their character, their stats, their personality, and then a small adventure which includes the NPC in question. The adventure is about 4 or 5 pages long, seems to serve more as an introduction to this character, and then it's up to the DM to continue the story if they wish to. The next character is Angel Pajaro, who is a were-fox. So the same kind of deal, she is preceded by an adventure. There we have the opera with the swinging chandelier. And then Rajiv Chendor, who is a were-tiger. And then Vladimir Nobriskov. The other 3 books in the Children of the Night series are Vampires, Ghosts, and The Created, which are golems, mostly flesh golems. Next up we have Mika, which is a pathological cat were. These Children of the Night books takes into a lot of the laws introduced in the Van Rigden's Guides series, and that's how you have pathological as a prefix, or true were-jackal, Abu Almir. And these prefixes kind of serve a bit like a power level, or provides additional nuance to the type of werebeast that they are, like Shania, which is the maledictive were-cobra. The different creatures have different systems when it comes to their power level. Ghosts, for example, are sorted by the order of magnitude, vampires go by age, and so on. It's designed to provide these monsters with additional lore, and also additional tools for the DM to make these monsters feel really unique. Here we have Bjorn Horstman. He's not a werebeast himself, he is a scientist. He's been studying lycanthropy and has developed a special strain of the disease which transforms his victim into a werebeast for 1 hour. So here we have someone who's slightly different, who is not a werebeast himself, and he has a slightly different take on the werebeast creatures. Then we have a were-crocodile. A lot of these werebeasts are not the standard stuff. This one is a were-ray, so she transforms into an oversized stingray. This book provides you with a lot of unusual animals that they transform into. And that's the end of the book, and that is Children of the Night Werebeasts. Next up we have the Forgotten Realms supplement, Volo's Guide to All Things Magical. This book was published in 1996. There was a series of Forgotten Realms supplements called the Volo's Guides. Most of the books in this series cover a specific region in the realms. They're more presented as like travel logs. Volo's Guide to All Things Magical is the only book in this series which covers something else. And in this case, it relates to magical items. So I got this book because it was heavily recommended to me as a resource for DMs for 2nd edition games. So all of these Volo's Guides are written by Volo Thumb Gadam, or Volo for short. He is an NPC in Faerun, and if you've played Baldur's Gate 3, he also makes an appearance in that game. Baldur's Gate 3 was somewhat accurate with his portrayal. He does come across a little bit like a lovable idiot, but he's generally a bit more competent than how the game portrays him. So this book introduces some new concept when it comes to magic. These are high-level spells designed to guard something. And then the next chapter goes into the magic of items. So the majority of this book goes into magic item creation. Back in 2nd edition, spellcasters can craft items when they get to a certain level. Like you've got some generic stuff like rings, wands, weapons, armor, but also wondrous items and miscellaneous stuff. But the base rules don't really go into the process of magic item creation. You're supposed to just tell your DM what you wanted to create. The DM will just set the amount of cost and the amount of time, and then ask the player to roll to see if you're successful. This book fills in a lot of the blanks when it comes to the process and provides you with some new spells which also aids on the creation of these magic items. And then it goes into the base material properties like gemstones. There are a lot of different types of gemstones. The book outlines what these types of gemstones are good for, provides you a lot of flavor. We're still on gemstones. And then it moves on to the different metals and does the same thing for metals. And the next section is the different type of woods. The illustration of the different types of trees are really nice as well. You can really use this book to make the crafting side of the game really fun and memorable. And then you can go through this book and tell them exactly the type of material that they need to procure. And that can lead into the next quest as your players are going out there to find this material. We have some new magic items. And then the next chapter goes into the magic of movement. This section provides you with some new spells themed around movement, such as teleport, more magic items, and then we have magic of the person, and then it goes into elixirs, and then it goes on to spellfire. It's explained as spellfire is viewed by most Faerunians as a ravening, all-consuming fire that the gods allow one person at a time in all the world to wield in order to humble kings, dragons, and other great mages. So these are very high-level abilities, which is why this book is a great resource for high-level games. Wizard shades are creatures created when a wizard is caught in their own magical backlash. They're mischievous character creatures which takes a form of a mist. The next section is Artifacts of the Realms. This book introduces several new artifacts, history, powers, how to use it in a campaign. Artifacts and relics back in 2nd edition are extremely powerful magic items. They have a lot of magical power, but using them also has a lot of detrimental side effects. Like the eye and the hand of Vecna are considered artifacts, and they will slowly corrupt the person who's using it. So these items are the same kind of idea. Obviously, as this book is designed for high level play, you get to a point where dragons are not even of much challenge, and that's when you break out the artifacts. And the last few pages, we just have the appendices on the different materials. And there you have it. That's Volo's guide to all things magical. Hey, thanks for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe so you can catch my future AD&D 2nd edition content. Until next time, hope we get to hang out again in my next video.